Yesterday, today, tomorrow. A discovery of the process of design, 20 years past and 20 years beyond. I call this my 2020 vision. I'm standing in a privileged position here tonight to offer my observations and my opinions, my thoughts and insights into the front line of social design, building for change between informal and formal practice. I begin with a memory of the words of Reolof from a lecture he presented to me almost 20 years ago, just before his death. Here at UCT, where I was a young architectural student, yesterday, today, tomorrow. Reolof started his lecture with a quote from Igor Stravinsky, draw me your words and I'll understand your meaning. He spoke of an urbanism of discovery, of creativity, of time and place, where design is a process of sense-making, giving us a sense of scale and definition in design, resolution through design. He asked us what informs our actions. Is it a special conscience of knowledge? He questioned our role in society as architects and urbanists, the human emphasis on the ethical responsibility to the profession, and architecture and planning just has to work. He showed us drawings of Isfahan, Chandigarh, and Jaipur, of places that celebrate the expression of the making of a city. The move between architecture and the urban realm seemed almost too easy for Reolof. He made me think beyond architecture, where architecture suddenly made sense as one component of the bigger whole. I have not forgotten these powerful words and carried them with me through my journey and search for an expression of an African urbanism. A journey of architecture, urban design, and planning, but also a journey of social understanding, mediation, facilitation, and very often crisis management as well. Although I am still learning, this lecture tonight is about my personal experience over 20 years, offering 7 key lessons, but in the process raising questions about sustainable development and the future of our cities. Critical to this is also learning from failures and successes. I will work between the experience and the VPUU case studies. All of the VPUU work is based on an integrated team approach. There are many people involved in the VPUU process. So I have the easy job tonight of speaking, but you have the hard job of listening. So to keep you on your toes, you have to see how many times you see a washing line in my slides. So to quote the words of Samuel Mockbee, proceed and be bold. It was from personal observation of traveling through my architectural studies that I became interested in investigating architecture beyond the building, looking at the city, the notion of informality in the formal public realm. I looked to the east. I was interested to understand the incredibly diverse use of urban space. It encouraged me to explore the notion of the everyday. I did not perceive the monumental buildings of the Taj Mahal were located right within the city. You always see them on the river. And then we moved to the smaller scale of Pushkar and the small spaces, or the city of Jodhpur and its blue dazzle. Back to Delhi. In my opinion, the vibrancy of the Indian street is a sensual experience. I observed convivial living in an urban environment. The bazaar was alive with life, the loud noise and orchestra of sounds with no conductor. The informal activities merged from one to the other. The boundaries were unknown, free to interact with the street or recess to the living domain. They changed as the negative became positive, solid became void, and open became closed. I looked south. I explored the ancient city of Machu Picchu, the vibrant city of La Paz, the highest city of Potosi, founded in 1545, but also the cultural city of Arequipa. I now look to the cities that are building change. I believe the cities in Latin America are at the forefront of social change. I have been lucky enough to visit some of these dynamic cities. Guayaquil, for example. They've created 2.5 kilometers of a boardwalk that has totally changed their public space, which was previously a very dangerous space. To Bogota, everybody always spoke about the transport routes in Bogota, but I found the interesting activity on the edge was absolutely amazing. We seek this in South Africa. In public spaces, people meet as equals, stripped bare of their social hierarchies. It was just quite amazing. Then I moved to Medellin in Colombia. For the Colombian city of Medellin, cooperation between civic society, private enterprise, policymakers, and academics laid the foundation for small, high-impact urban developments that targeted the city's social inequality and economic inequities. The government embarked on an unusual move to gradually legalize informal settlements. It's a very important point. The move not only eased the burden of costly relocation programs, it also recognized residents as valued residents in the city and granted them dignity. Improved housing quality and giving legal status to the informal settlements marked just the beginning of Medellin's transformation. To tackle the social ills, violence, and crime, the mayor's administration developed a series of multi-neighborhood projects called Integral Urban Projects, which targeted the most affected slums. The policy they formulated became known as urban acupuncture, small-scale but high-impact projects designed to decrease illegal activities, strengthen government authority, and rebuild social and economic institutions. This urban acupuncture transformed what was once the homicide capital of the world into a model of sustainable urban livability. I've had the benefit of working with Francesco and Catalina, who are here tonight, and I've also had the experience of visiting Medellin. It has been a truly amazing experience. Medellin tackled investment in public space, combined with novel transport solutions to make the entire city more accessible. Medellin fought violence and inequality by investing in public space. This is a public escalator in the open. I think education was a key element to address to contribute to a more equal and developed society with the development of the library parks and also the development of key projects within specific land that is between the fringes. I now move to some educational aspects that I look to. As Nabil Hamdi explained to me when I was a PhD student, he said to me, "Katie, you fit into that grey zone. That is not conventional." I was quite worried. Blurred boundaries between planning, urban design, and architecture, particularly when you come in with a social environment. The studio world is ordered, stable, and rigorous with lovely deadlines. But the outside world is complex, ambiguous, diverse, with a lot of uncertainty. Both worlds should come together. It is in the boundaries where innovation and experimentation occurs. It is out-of-the-box thinking. I seek inspiration from other educational learning practice, such as the studio supervised by Christian Hermansen, who was my PhD supervisor at the Oslo School of Architecture and Design. Scarcity and Creativity Studio. This was a building built by students in Chile. I then just want to quickly focus on a recent project that we worked with. We worked with some CPUT students, where we were working on a public space intervention, where we went from a paper-based product very quickly to a co-design process. And I have seen some of the students here tonight as well who were part of this process. We also ran some work with some UCT architectural students working on the ground. I think the outcome of this was a very interactive outcome. The map sat up in our office for a couple of weeks, and everybody got to engage in this process. So it was a valuable working with students. So we moved to lesson number 2. We've now educated ourselves, and we can now move on. So lesson number 2, reinventing urban planning. So this is where the 2020 proposal comes in. We've converted the 5-day test cricket, which I used to score for the boys at school into a far more exciting half-day game. This had to change due to demand. So it is with our planning. One might be as bold to suggest that the old master plan is dead. We are moving from the planned city to a city that plans, a city of integrated multi-sectorial approaches to sustainable development. The aim is to embrace the views of the citizens, government, local leaders, investors, intermediaries. The objective is to integrate infrastructure, land use, culture, natural resources, and education. I call this the inclusive city. We live in a new urban area where cities experience enormous pressure. It is 20 years since Habitat II was set in Istanbul in 1996 to address the universal goals of ensuring adequate shelter for all and making human settlements safer, healthier, more livable, equitable, sustainable, and productive. Those are quite solid and meaningful words. But what has happened in 20 years? Do urban dwellers have access to adequate shelter and safe environments? Has there been an improvement in the quality of life? No, I don't think so. Cities are complex. Cities are demanding. Cities are loaded with deficiencies and struggling against the pressure of expansion and climate change. Let's just look at some quick facts. For the first time in history, more than half of humanity lives in urban areas. By 2050, this proportion will reach nearly 70%, making urbanization one of the 21st century's most transformative trends, intensifying its social, economic, political, cultural, environmental challenges. In South Africa, approximately 1.6 million households live in informal settlements, but there are 2.3 million people on the housing waiting list, an unmanageable feat for government to supply adequate and safe housing for all. 16 million people rely on the subsidy grant, and over 60% of the population earn below $3,500 per month, which qualifies them for a free house. The numbers just don't add up. Within a 20-year period of South African democracy, the government has delivered 2.8 million low-cost houses nationally, based predominantly on one house, one plot scenario. The authoritarian emphasis on housing has been related to the quantity of houses delivered as opposed to the quality of the urban environments created, the delivery of sprawling, vulnerable cities lacking identity. Differences between theory, policy, and practice are still disparate in a democratic South Africa. The random interaction of these three spheres regularly determines an unjust and unsustainable urban form. To move to one of my favorites, Jane Jacobs. She argues cities are an immense laboratory of trial and error, failure and success, in city building and city design. This is the city laboratory in which city planning should have been learning and forming and testing its theories. Instead, the practitioners and teachers of this discipline have ignored the study of successes and failures to some degree. As Friedman says and argues, for the strength of a region is in its people and their ways of life and engaging local citizens. Identity, belonging, love, respect, home, and a job. Those are some of the principles that the people use. But as in urban planning, we use spatial plan, development node, urban corridor. It doesn't make much sense to people who just want a job. The majority of urban poor households strive for a secure, sufficient, and decent livelihood that they have reason to value. The utmost priority is for family to ensure physical and social well-being in a push towards poverty reduction. This is Yolita Pandey, a strong and determined woman who's 48 years old when I worked with her. She works hard for her money with her dressmaking from her home. I think her words are quite strong. The home, Musha, if you haven't got your home, you haven't got your life, because that is where your life is. If you have got the home, you are somebody. You are somebody who is respected, and if you want to build, you can build until you are satisfied. So it is very, very important to have a home. So 2016 marks the era for a new urban agenda to be set at Habitat 3. The new urban agenda should be in line with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, especially Goal 11, to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. It's not too far off what Habitat 2 was. However, agendas might not deliver for a host of reasons. They might be too general or have too many competing or contradictory objectives, or fail to align commitments that effective implementation pathways for delivering them. The current iteration of the new urban agenda is comprehensive, following on a thorough consultative process, but any agenda that is too broad does not give you a powerful roadmap to guide and inform transformative change. So in a move towards inclusive city, one where theory, policy, and practice come together through good governance, that includes a strong transformative roadmap, including strong leadership, inclusive and responsible participation, reinventing urban planning to a city that plans, and innovative financing systems. So let's move on to Lesson 3. Lesson 3 is about integrated multi-sectorial approaches that are central to achieving sustainable urban development. Here I would like to introduce the Violence Prevention through Urban Upgrading program as a route towards the inclusive city, but certainly not the only answer. I think Sir Peter Hall gave us a very good description of what we actually do. The VPUU program addresses the most basic priority of urban policy, personal safety. It offers a proven solution to this problem where the issue is most acute, the informal and semi-formalized housing areas that are proliferating on the urban edges of major cities throughout the developing world. And on he goes. So violence prevention through urban upgrading is a comprehensive, area-based community development program that aims towards safe and integrated sustainable communities, citizenship, pride, and the improvement of the quality of life. The project is based on the understanding that environmental design can affect people's choices. This in turn influences their perception of safety, whether perceived or real. The VPUU program in the Western Cape, South Africa, aims to nurture integrated communities by addressing these issues and perceptions. VPUU is both a program and a non-profit company. The VPUU NPC is the project executing authority for the program in partnership with the Western Cape government and the German Development Bank, with the engagement of various municipalities. Michael Krauser, who is an urban designer, strategically leads and guides the VPUU multidisciplinary team. He has taught me an immense amount during my time at VPUU. This team operates within 6 work streams, and I know many of them are here representing all the different work streams. So there is situational or built environment, social crime, institutional, community participation, knowledge management, and project management. This team works together with partners and consultants to achieve sustainable development by designing clear strategies and processes for operation, maintenance, management systems, co-design, implementation, and so on. My role falls to the workstream leader for situational crime prevention, but that was too much of a mouthful, so we decided to call it the built environment. The built environment is a team of built environment professionals, but we range from architects, urban designers, planners, and we work with a local construction team on the ground. And I know Andile, the foreman, is here tonight, and I'm very proud that he is. We also work with external consultants and professionals to implement projects. There are 3 key focuses of the built environment: the safe public realm, activation and partnerships, and management, operation, and maintenance. So if we move to Harare, Harare was one of the first safe node areas that responded to the local residents' needs to overcome high levels of crime along primary desired pedestrian routes. The intention was to create a series of landmark nodes with safe connectivity. The Harare Urban Park, the Harare Square are examples of the transformation of unproductive, crime-infected space to a sustainable, multifunctional public space. In 2006, this was a crime hotspot. By 2011, it had a defined access and a safe movement route. What I have to say is that my time at VPUU came after the Harare work, So I was also lucky enough to work from the benefits of working in Harare, to understand the full emphasis of what we were actually doing. I move on to lesson number 4, a participative approach to area-based development. Great cities don't just happen. They evolve from communities where there is a strong sense of identity, trust, and active participation. Such cities build on the unique strengths and opportunities that can be natural assets, people assets, or livelihoods, and hopefully a combination of them all. Community is at the core. The VPUU program is a participatory research approach featuring the strategy of prevention, cohesion, protection, and research and development, and incorporates elements of international best practice. I'd like to move to the rural town of Villiersdorp, where VPUU is currently working as part of the VPUU Western Cape program. The approach is the whole of society approach to the improved quality of life. With safety at the center, the Villiersdorp Public Investment Framework reviews the spatial layers of the rural-urban context of the town. This links to the larger ecological systems and urban systems. So it is a big challenge to move to a very small town as compared to working in the context of Khayelitsha. So we started working with the community and the local leadership. The local municipality has been incredibly involved, but we're also working with landscape architects and architects to be able to reach a more participative process to actually being able to intervene. And I'm not only talking about interventions in terms of built interventions, I'm talking specifically in terms of social implementation. We ran a process in 2015, and we set 2 teams up. And they actually, in the end, came up with 2 very similar approaches. So I think the aspect of actually taking people through a co-design process is as much a learning curve as it is for us as it is for them. I think crucial to our work in Villiersdorp was also the activation of space. And this is an activation of space for the future toy library. We ran an open day in February, and it has continued with the placemakers under the social crime prevention of activating the space before we build. It's very important to build that level of trust with the community before one actually does implement. So now I move on to lesson number 5, the public realm as the main catalyst for social change. In the formation of contemporary urban developments in Southern Africa, it seems that less attention is given to the space in between the buildings, the very glue that unites the elements of the positive spatial structure, the shared space, the space that is a catalyst for social change. One may question why this is so. Public space creates sites of numerous encounters and events, political questioning and social conflict, spatial tension and productive economies. Efforts by the poor to appropriate community space, although much contested, are an integral part to the process of self-empowerment and social networking. They are places that open up the divide between strangers. It is also in these spaces that we call for more positive memorialization and the integration into the past through dialogue, debate, storytelling, story walls, and everything that I've been harping on in the office about. A critical issue is to design the public spaces that are generally very difficult for individuals to provide due to budgets and scale. So now I move to Paarl East in particular. And in this, I move into Chicago. And within that, I move into the area called Freedom Park. We've been working with Tana Klissner landscape architects on this project. But we've also been looking at Paarl at a much bigger scale, which I can't go into tonight. But it's about how do we create spaces that create areas of cohesion and integration. At a larger scale, the Berg River Basin, from a regional perspective, and its urbanization potential, whilst also imposing its risks. If one takes it to the scale immediately of the Safe Node area and Freedom Park, this is currently the battle zone for the youth gangs in Chicago. The cricket pitch is the battle line, and it is considered the hotspot. This area roughly measures 3.3 hectares, so bigger than a secondary school. It's so big that you can't see from one side to the other. But yet, it still has a lot of positive elements about it, and I'm still determined that we will be able to implement in Freedom Park. In 2015, we activated the space by playing a game, cricket. And then we also had the local cricketer from the Chicago Kings come and join us as well. And it's through those encounters with people in these environments that we actually begin to learn. We also tagged the fence, which lasted probably about an hour before they were taken down. This was followed by a series of co-design workshops to work through scenarios and interventions, and this could not have been considered in isolation from workstream integration. All the work streams were part of these workshops, and everybody had a certain part to play, particularly social crime prevention, and that is particular for safety, and social crime in terms of youth. So this year we started a walking bus to try and activate the space in a different way. We moved between the secondary school and the primary school. And what has happened since then is that we've actually managed to get, I heard today that we've got an extra 30 neighbourhood watch who are willing to act as the walking bus. So the children can actually get to school and home on time, or not even on time, just get there. I think that that's a major achievement for me, and I'm very proud of the social crime prevention for continuing some of my mad ideas. Jane Jacobs takes the idea of the street and the sidewalk and applies the notion of safety. She states, when people say that the city or a part of it is dangerous or is a jungle, that what they mean primarily is that they do not feel safe on the sidewalks. To keep the city safe is a fundamental task of the city streets and its sidewalks. So primary investment in public space is crucial in areas that have minimal access to safe outdoor space. But what is imperative is not to over-design such spaces, and also spaces at all different scales. Highly designed and crisp public environments are sometimes sterile civic places. The key is to provide just enough of a design framework to understand the important elements and conflicting possibilities that will shape the urban development. Often contestation and problems over space lead to more dynamic solutions. Freedom Park. So that is where we stand with Freedom Park today, providing just enough to stabilize the community and just enough to get children walking safely to school. Crucial to this is the youth. The development of a youth and lifestyle centre has the potential to fundamentally change the current environment. So the idea is not to implement immediately, but the idea is to set up activation of programs through the Youth and Lifestyle Centre. I'm very positive, and I do believe that we're going to make a change, and I can see Liesl sitting in the middle, and she is going to lead that with Isa. So lesson number 6, recognize informality. Informality is a form of city production or by-production that acts outside the formal frameworks, mostly without state control and law. Informality, and I refer to shelter, transport, land systems, and employment, however, have creative ways of interweaving with the formally planned, organized, and regulated city form, inhabited by a diverse population. I often refer to this as the underground network, to borrow from a few people, such as Mitchell, and is often a very dynamic process. The African city needs to allow for the unpredictable. Under current conditions of extreme and rapid transformation experienced in the majority of cities, change manifests itself most evidently through space. The urban poor make and remake space, transform space, and capture space. They intrude into the patterned grid of history through informal activities, permeating into every aspect of the functioning of society. People and their activities form a fundamental dynamic part of the building of a city in the context of urban Africa. They never told me that at Archie School. They disrupt the coherence of a planned urban landscape visually, emotionally, resourcefully, and powerfully. So I looked to the south, an African city, my birth city, my home city. Harare, Zimbabwe. Due to extreme poverty, spontaneous informal trading develops along the streets and is often the only way of survival. A high proportion of citizens live and work on the pavements and around the markets, which are found often near the public meeting places. Now I'm going back to my UCT thesis quite a long time ago, where I took on the task of investigating informal trading along the route leading from the CBD into the south of Harare called Mbari. This was an example of an informal, spontaneous activity route being the gateway to the city. I even took my mother there. And she came on me on site visits, and that was the birth of my work on the ground. I moved to my PhD. A critical issue for informally built settlements is not merely their existence, but how they are perceived and dealt with. Landscape architect Christian Worthman identified 5 stages in which society tend to address informal settlement development. Number 1, denial, eradication, tolerance, improvement, and anticipation. Historically, these have not always been in the same order. For example, some places or informally built settlements may be tolerated, while elsewhere their existence is denied. I will tell you a story of hope, followed by destruction, or eviction, followed by survival. Pachipana Chikwere, a young father of 5 children, Chikwere and his wife Zenzo lived at stand number 6235 in Hatcliffe Newsstands, Harare, Zimbabwe. It's very important. That number for him was incredibly important. In 2002, they moved from their space in the holding camp to a new verbally allotted plot at the Newsstands. They were very proud of their new address. Chikwere helped me with my PhD research. He regarded himself as the research manager, and he was totally in control. That was their house in the Newsstands. Chikwere was subject to extreme poverty, but he was always very passionate about improving his family's quality of life. Urban informal land is political and often contested, almost invisible. Dramatic and devastating spatial, economic, and social change occurred in Zimbabwe in the winter months of 2005. Evictions, which were activated by the Zimbabwean government under Operation Murambachina, resulted in the authoritarian system destroying, torching, and dismantling the homes of the urban poor, working in poverty-stricken urban areas. The 2 settlements where I had conducted my research were victims of these evictions. They were both completely demolished. When I managed to track down Zenzo in 2006, I found that Chikwere had died. He had died in 2004. She was very glad that he wasn't there in 2005 when they were evicted. I went back in 2007. They managed to get back onto their plot and build a small house through some donations. Urban land tenure may not mean much to some, but it may mean everything to some. Back to Medellin. Informal settlements need new ideas. It is not possible to solve informalities with formal procedures. I have so found this out. We need to find new ways to intervene with a reurbanization methodology. I love that. It just makes so much sense to me. In the past several months, South Africa was instrumental in bringing the issue of informal settlements to the Habitat 3 discussion. Informal settlements have been on the agenda for many years. This is the opportunity to incorporate best practice with regard to urban tenure and spatial planning as a more sustainable approach to address informal settlements. There is a quest to prioritize in situ upgrading to respond to the scale of urban poverty, a progressive shift that does not speak of evictions or elimination, but of informal settlements that are recognized and included. However, I still do not believe we're quite there. So in Monwabisi Park is home to about 24,000 people, or almost 6,500 dwelling units. That is the size of a small town in some cities in Europe. There is very limited infrastructure, and poverty and crime are major challenges. VPUU has been working there since 2009. I started working on this project in 2010. The perceived safety in 2009 was that most respondents felt crime was a very serious problem. So we started with the movement network. We geolocated the existing movement patterns on site with handheld GPS machines. We did this with the local community and the local leadership, and also the community facilitator, who was very irritated with me by the end because I kept walking and walking and walking. I needed to understand what this area was really about to be able to make sure that we could plan for a difference. The landscape in this area is a dune system, but it is not too different from what Khayelitsha was pre-1980s. The urban edge and the natural edge are two intersecting points where we needed to deal with safety, and safety being traffic safety, safety being crime safety, and also safety in terms of a perceived tenure system. The red dots in the middle were located as celebration spaces, or spaces where people knew that they were intersecting streets coming together. We created a new network with the existing network. We created neighbourhoods of a more manageable size that could then be renumbered and worked out to work with the enumeration process to be able to say you can have a postman deliver your letter. We created a spatial reconfiguration plan. We then tried to deal with how we would actually implement those areas in detail. I will come to this space now, but that's quite important to understand. It was on a network, it's on a route. It was between road to nature reserve. This goes through an annual review process, quite a rigorous annual review process, linked to the community action plan. So that's the basis of the Monwabisi Park project, but now what I'd like to do is move on to lesson number 7, which is interlinked to lesson number 6. There is generally a correlation between location and the scale of public space. The larger spaces usually associate with the most accessible urban conditions, but that is not to say the smaller productive public spaces and places have a fundamental impact on the neighbourhood and its inhabitants, allowing for small but vital change. Friedman, another one of my favorites, argues that most of us live our lives locally, not universally. We treasure the small spaces of the city. It is often these small spaces that are leftover space and often form the most exciting of places for me. Nabil Hamdi puts forward an argument for the wisdom of the street, the ingenuity that improvises the long-term, large-scale effectiveness of immediate small-scale actions. Nabil bears on the question of what is practice relating to the political context, the lessons of the informal settlement, the pursuit of learning that challenges convention, everybody to build their community. It sets out a way of thinking of cities that gives precedence to small-scale, incremental change over large-scale projects. It's about the trickle-up effect rather than the top-down approach. Here I'd like to introduce the term Emtonjeni. This is perceived as a multifunctional place for children to play in a safe environment and for the provision of selected utilities. These spaces are focused internally to the neighbourhood cluster rather than externally to the bigger settlement. There are approximately 50 to 100 houses. They are often associated with water points or washing areas and actually areas of gathering. They are located along pedestrian desire routes, and they're often seen as the breathing spaces along the pathways. These are the spaces for small change, allowing for implementation at the site level to test the methodologies, processes, and outcomes, which can be monitored, is what we have been doing. In 2010, the Emtonjeni concept was created by this forum, and a series of workshops that followed thereafter with the ECD Forum, the Safe Node Area Committee, NGOs, City of Cape Town line departments, Sun Development, VPUU. We identified early childhood development as part of the spatial reconfiguration plan as one element towards crime prevention. The ECD approach is area-based to allow universal access to education and health and safety for children. One would think those are two quite simple tasks. 6 years down the line, and it's just as hard as when we began. So we looked at the area of impact of where the existing ECDs were. We've roughly got about 3,000 children in this area with only, it ranges 10 or 12 creches. It's a huge amount of children that are not going to any form of education between 0 to 6. So we tried to create an area of impact that would actually start allowing a universal access to children's education through an outreach program in the public spaces. And I know Steph is here tonight as well, and she was instrumental in this part of the project in developing the Mthonjenis. So this was Mthonjeni. We named it CO4 because that was the name of the tap. For ease in the community, that was what it became. We did not implement anything. We ran an early childhood program working with 2 teachers and about 10 or 11 volunteers. We then, a year later, started a very broad framework of construction. It's only 40 square meters, this space. This is the space currently, or it was in 2014, but this space is probably one of the best used space for early childhood development. Then I moved to M15. Note the red car in the background, another very important aspect about observing the environment. So what we did here is we actually started a different task or a different way of doing it. So it was chosen by the stakeholders, the group that we had been working with for now 3 years as one of the spaces to intervene. We then worked with the local neighbours and set up a community contract. We then, by that stage, we had our own Mthonjeni team, our construction team, who actually lived in Monobisi Park, so they were local. I just love the red car, planning around the red car. We then constructed it with a lot of onlookers, and then that was M15 afterwards. We still allowed the red car to come back. But what was interesting is that window there, which they ran, this was called the Star Spaza Shop. They moved their window from over here to there because they got a better visual onto the Mthonjeni and obviously more customers. So now I just move to what we consider the active box. In 2010, we looked at Monobisi Park and decided that the edge conditions were areas that we needed to look at the safety. They were probably the most vulnerable to Monobisi Park. It was quite a hard decision to actually know you're putting something on the edge to actually improve a condition. The more and more I go there, the more and more I realize how much it has changed over the years. And it has gone from an area that was a dump site to an area that is actually at 6 o'clock at night, still activated, and children playing on the soccer court. So the active box idea was developed within the Harare development as architectural landmarks or vertical elements in the public realm that can serve to function as visual connectors or orientation devices, improving a pedestrian's perception of safety. The concept of active box buildings was developed in Harare. So this is the active box. This was last year. There was an ECD festival that I didn't even know about, but I happened to come across the one day to see what was actually going on. To the side of the active box was a leftover space. We decided to go through quite an intense community planning process. That was actually back with UCT, and we worked on another space with UCT, but not this space, but this was one of the spaces. In 2014, there was a community festival here, and it's now become known as Monobisi Park, the heart of soccer. Every year on Heritage Day, they have a soccer tournament. This is just one of the kickabouts. The lower kickabout we had to extend because we were told it's not big enough to carry league matches, so we then extended it. So this idea on building on the edge actually, for me, has made an incredible improvement to the lives of people there. Last year, at the end of last year, we had a container and decided to upgrade it. The intention was a youth container. It's now being used for all sorts of things, but I think that's the nature of what we do. So to move to Lotus Park, in 2012, we ran a community planning process. It's a lot smaller than Monobisi Park. There are 1,450 households living in Lotus Park, but it has a dwelling density unit of 220 dwelling units per hectare. So it's a high density, but a much more manageable size of a settlement to work in. We decided to focus on the northern precinct. A key thing came up in the community action plan was the need for an enrichment centre for the long term. But we thought we actually had to start changing the space. And it's not only about the development that we did in Lotus Park, it's about the connection across the street and the connection to the railway station. This was the site in 2013. We still have the goats, I have to say. They have not disappeared. We had construction, we went through a planning process, we built it in containers and eco-beams as a temporary building in an informal settlement. And this was the space before we did the court space. And this was the space just now in July, when I was there in July. I think fundamental to me is this space it has come about incrementally. It didn't just develop itself. We had to work with what we had, the resources we had, the community that we had. When we asked the community, we got some extra funding and we said, what would you like? Would you like a soccer, five-a-side soccer? Do you want netball? Do you want basketball? And in the end, nobody could decide. So we gave all three. And what I just love about this space is that the women have taken over. And the netball groups are the ones that actually fight it out and battle it out to be on the court, especially after Women's Day yesterday. There's also ETD programs running, and we recently upgraded the little space inside to act as more as a toy library, and very positive aspects working with different line departments and provincial government on 1,000 Days program for women and children. And then just looking back from the neighbourhood centre back into the settlement, I think for me it is about an institutional tenure. So it's claiming the space for the public domain, rather than saying, let's focus on the household, which we know is almost impossible in an informal settlement. So how do we claim these public spaces and these public buildings into an informal settlement? We then put some lights because we saw that everybody was playing late into the night and the children were now activating the spaces. And this photograph is on behalf of Mark, who took it for me. But what is also important for me here is that you can actually look across from Lotus Park to the new Amandla Youth Safe Hub on the other side of the road. So at night it becomes a beacon of light. But let's just look at how much of a problem is crime. So this is in Lotus Park. In 2011, the baseline survey showed us that there were a large amount of people that thought crime was a serious problem or a very serious problem. In the 2016 annual survey, very recent, we're getting only about 45% who are thinking it's a serious or a very serious problem. That is still a problem, but at least it shows some form of improvement. I think the one that I love the best was that the neighbourhood centre showed that the community awareness, 94% of the people knew that there was a neighbourhood centre there. But I think partly most of that is because they have to walk straight past it as the entrance into Lotus Park. So this is a photograph from the Amandla Safe Hub across the road looking back at Lotus Park. In collaboration with Amandla Edu Football, the Oliver Kahn Foundation, Western Cape Government, German Development Bank, City of Cape Town, VPUU NPC, and Sun Development, and many more partners, the proposal is to create a safe, vibrant, activated space for the youth. The Safe Hub in Gugulethu and Manenberg is a good example of applying the VPUU safety principles to deal with the safety in both Gugulethu and Manenberg. Not only that, it links to the Lotus Park, giving facilities to people who never previously had them. The Safe Hub model was designed by Amandla to globally distribute intergenerational cycles of poverty, unemployment, and inequality that trap young people growing up in urban settlements. The Safe Hub includes an artificial turf, a training academy, a psychosocial support centre, and a youth cafe, which is run by the local youth. Important, this area is Wi-Fi enabled as well, and that's the area by day from the Younger Junction train station. So why do I believe in building for change? I am fascinated by the unpredictable people and social networks. I am intrigued by informality within the city. I am inspired by the gaps in between, the public realm. I believe in catalytic social architecture driven by urban design. I am passionate about education and learning for real. I am thoughtful about the future for my children and all those other children. I believe in buildings for change. But, to conclude, how do we make those 7 lessons actually come alive? So I've given 7 pointers. Number 1, make mistakes. Be happy making mistakes. That's a hard one for me. Number 2, development takes time. That's a very difficult concept to try and tell some official who has on their checklist that you have to spend budget by such a date. But also time in some instances is not there to have when there's flooding or fire. Productive partnerships. It's more about a trusting partnership. With the trusting partnerships, you end up in good communication. In good communication, you understand each other, and then you can do what you want to do. Number 4, work with the local knowledge. Don't pretend to know. Don't pretend you are the one professional coming in and understanding the environment. Absorb the local knowledge, absorb their skills, their wisdom, encourage social encounters, shake your hands with the Chicago Kings guy with no teeth. Make sure you understand what he is experiencing. Find the catalyst within the framework. Small scale, community-based, start small. Don't do something that counts. Set yourself achievable actions. And one of my favorites, turn things around. Reverse the order of what you started with. Break the rules. Allow for creative design problem solving. And one for the team, get involved. And I thank you. Did anybody guess how many washing lines there were? There had to be 7. There are 7. There was just one last thing that I thought, just looking at my 2 boys there. I would like to dedicate this lecture to and their future and doing good in the world. So Oliver and Benjamin, this one's for you.